So the next speaker up is Tchiki. And Tchiki is talking about how practicing our skills makes us better at those skills. It's a really fascinating presentation, and I look forward to hearing it as much as you guys. So let's give her a round of applause.
I've never held a microphone before. It's fancy. See if I can do both the clicker and the microphone. So I'm going to talk to you guys today a little bit about the scientific foundations for developing wellness interventions. But before I begin, I just want to give you a quick story about Sally. So Sally was raised by a loving but single mother, so oftentimes they had financial difficulties. For example, one time they couldn't afford brakes for the family car and they barreled through a fence on a country road. Other times they'd have to go to the church to get food for the week. And so, as you can imagine, these are difficult experiences for any child to experience. But Sally didn't actually see them that way. She looked at that beat-up car and it brought a smile to her face every day. And she savored the moment she got to spend with her mom going to the church to get food. So Sally was able to turn these seemingly negative situations into positive ones. And currently, 1 in 5 adolescents will develop an emotional health disorder. And Sally's ability to reframe these negative events as positive prevented her from being one of those kids. So how did Sally do this? And how do we teach other people to sort of look at the challenges in their lives in a similar way? And these are the types of questions I've been aiming to answer as a grad student at Berkeley over the last few years. And I've been aiming to do this by studying emotion, how emotion contributes to mental health, and how we use technology to change emotional processes and improve our mental health. And I've been trying to do this as much as possible with an interdisciplinary perspective, with support from NIH and then other technology and science organizations on campus. But today I'm going to zoom in a little bit and talk to you guys about wellness interventions. So first, I'd like to talk about what wellness interventions are and why we need them. Then I'd like to talk about what the current standards are for intervention development and assessment. And then I'd like to talk about how we create wellness interventions that will actually work in applied settings. And since technology is becoming widespread, many of these will probably be online in the future. And then actually I've left the majority of the time to just answer questions and talk to you guys about your ideas, so hopefully we can do that as well. So let's just start with what wellness interventions are and why we need them. So wellness interventions focus on increasing positive emotion. Most traditional psychotherapies tend to focus on teaching people skills to decrease their negative emotion, so this is kind of an alternate approach to addressing mental health issues. And in particular, some of these interventions include things like paying attention to positive material, capitalizing on positive events by savoring, sharing, or writing, positively reappraising events, essentially what Sally did in my example, seeing her negative event as positive. And practicing gratitude. And these are just a couple of examples of the types of things that are included in these types of interventions. So why do we need these things? Well, as you all know, we all experience stress in our lives. We might lose a job, or we might break up with a serious romantic partner, or in the case of many of the students that I work with, they move all the way across the country to go to Berkeley, which is exciting but also stressful. And it's totally normal for people to experience a dip in well-being after they experience these types of stressors. Most of the time, people kind of recover across time and return to their emotional baseline. But some individuals don't have the emotional coping skills to fully recover, and then they go on to develop serious mental health issues. A third group of people use this event to really thrive. They try to bond with other people in their lives, or they use it as an opportunity to learn new skills. And so we like to think that wellness interventions kind of bring people up to these two categories. And we know from past research that these types of interventions decrease negative emotions and symptoms of depression. They even decrease symptoms of physical illness. And they also improve well-being in things like happiness, satisfaction with life, creativity, and even workplace success. So to zoom in a little bit, here's an example of some research I conducted in my lab where we looked at the effects of a wellness intervention across 5 weeks and then even at 1-year follow-up. And you can see on the y-axis we have depression symptoms, and we found a significant decrease in depression symptoms from this online intervention, even across 5 weeks. And importantly, these results held even a year later. So these things really can have an important impact. We see a very similar result for well-being. So again, there's an increase across time that mostly holds at 1-year follow-up. So in sum, we need these types of interventions to prevent the development of serious mental health issues, to reduce existing symptoms of mental illness, and to promote thriving. So now that you guys know a little bit more about what these interventions are and why we need them, I want to talk a little bit about the current standards for intervention development and assessment. So there's this trend kind of in the social impact world to measure impact instead of just intent to impact. So for example, many of the examples that were put up here on the screen earlier tonight, there's all these different products trying to have an impact on people's lives, but very few of them actually assess the impact that they have. And so there's this important trend where people are trying to figure out how much impact each of these products actually has. And so I just want to say impact is not defined as the number of people the product reaches or the number of people who are told about the product. It's not even the people who say the product is helpful. Impact is actually the extent to which your product changed some aspect of your users' lives. And so again, back to this example, we found that, about an 8-point decrease in depression symptoms as a result of our intervention. So this is just one way to measure impact, but it's really important that you have some idea of how effective these interventions are. So next, let's talk about the types of assessments that are important to use. So there's this recent trend to focus on dimensional assessment versus categorical. You guys are probably familiar with whether, like, a person who has a diagnosis of something versus not having a diagnosis. But these days, we're actually measuring things in terms of symptoms. And the reason this is important is because people fall all along this range of well-being and ill-being, and you really want to know, even if a person isn't at that purple line and classifying as having a disorder, you want to know how much your intervention helps them. I also want to talk a little bit about behavioral measures. So when if you were wanting to measure how socially rejected somebody felt, you could just ask them, right? You could say, how socially rejected do you feel? But this is actually really biased by a number of features about the person. So for example, how recently you were socially rejected will affect how you respond to this question. Your current mood will affect how you respond. And even your feelings about who you are will affect how you respond to these types of things. So if you're using it as an index of impact, you really need to be careful about how you're interpreting it. So what we try to do these days is focus more on behavioral tasks. So in this example, you're the little hand at the bottom, and you're playing with these two, and they're throwing the ball back and forth, and after a short period of time, they start leaving you out. And this has been widely shown to induce feelings of rejection. And if you ask somebody how rejected they feel in response to this, they don't have to think about a time they were rejected, or even think about other factors. And so it's more closely related to how people actually react. So in sum, it's important to show evidence of impact, to use dimensional assessments, and we need to use behavioral measures whenever possible. Next, I'd like to talk about how we create wellness interventions that will work in applied settings. So as an academic, this is something we're particularly bad at and something I would love your feedback on in the Q&A. But the research shows that people won't do these types of wellness interventions, even though they're good for them, when they're too difficult, too long, too boring, even if they have to leave the web page in order to do the activity, or if they don't include motivation-enhancing features. So we know that if we tell people why they're doing the activity, there's increased engagement. If we teach them how to apply the skills in their real lives, there's increased engagement. And even if we give them social proof, basically, if we tell them that somebody else that was benefited by this activity, they're likely to be more engaged. So these are some of the issues I've been trying to work through in a project I've been working on over the last few years called Lifenik. And so at Lifenik, we're trying to make games that grow emotionally healthy kids. And you guys intuitively know that practicing a skill makes you better at that skill. For example, if we want to learn math, we practice math problems. Or if we want to learn a new language, we practice speaking the language. But the same thing is also true for emotional skills. So we know from emotion and neuroscience research that if you practice emotional skills, even in online contexts, even in game-like tasks, or even for a few minutes per day, this results in real-world improvements in mental health and well-being. So imagine if there were games where kids could practice thinking about themselves positively. If they did this over and over again, it would become automatic, and then the quality of their entire lives could be improved. So at Lifenik, we're trying to combine research on learning, emotion skills training, and neuroscience. And we're trying to combine this all with games, so the kids are actually motivated to learn these important skills. See if the video works. I just have a short video showing you some prototypes of these games. These are really rough, but I wanted to give you a sense that this is actually possible. All right, you ready for the video? Okay. No. So in this example, people are kind of repeatedly exposed to positive words, which makes them more accessible in your brain and then easier to use in the future. In this example, the dinosaur has to eat the positive bugs and avoid the grumpy bugs, which make him sick. And this teaches kids kind of how to reappraise negative situations as positive. And in this example, you have to find the smiling face in a grid of non-smiling faces. And by doing this, this actually translates into your ability to see positive things in your environment. So these are all based on academic research. It's amazing that these kinds of studies have been done, but they have. And so basically, in sum, I just want to say that it's totally possible to translate research into these types of games, and that I really think we need to balance the scientific evidence with user engagement to make this an actual successful thing. So finally, I want to open it up to discussion, but one more slide. And I also want to let you guys know I'm a program development and impact assessment consultant. So if you all are working on projects like this, please come talk to me. And I'd love to help you figure out how to assess the effectiveness of your projects. Done. And so apparently we need to use the mic.
Yeah. Hey. That's really fascinating. Do you know, or have you seen any links between an issue somebody's starting with and how long it takes to correct that issue?
Whoa, that got loud. So because we use these dimensional assessments, correct the issue is, we don't operationalize it like that. Like if you have a diagnosis of depression, technically you can be like 1 point on the scale and lower 1 point out of diagnosis. And so if I said that, like, it doesn't take very long at all. But to do something significant, like what we try to do is reduce depression by 20% in 5 weeks, which we were able to do. So that's pretty awesome, I think. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah. And especially if there's a way to predict, they're starting at point A, how long will it take to get to point B, and what could the best reasonable improvement be for different stuff?
I know we should talk.
Yeah.
But certainly there are individual differences. So person A can get to point B a lot faster than person B can get to point B. And so like I'd love to chat with you about AI and how to work that stuff in. Cool. Other questions? You're all the way in the back.
Has there been any data that shows decline in the capability to learn these skills with age?
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's very similar to learning other skills. So learning the regions of the brain that are involved in emotion are very similar to like other cognitive abilities. So they kind of peak around age 8 and then decline into our 20s, and then it's really tough in adulthood, which is why I'm trying to focus on kids, because they have this unique capability to learn, and we're out of luck. Not out of luck, but it's a lot harder.
Hi. So other than these games, I guess kids are probably playing many other games, like video games. Have people assessed, all those hours, what that does to people's ability to process emotion?
I know that there was a study that came out recently looking at violent video games, reducing people's empathy. So it depends, I think, a lot on the content of the game. We learn through every game we play. Like in Guitar Hero, we learn how to play the little guitar, right? And so if we can figure out ways to use these learning paradigms to teach good skills like compassion and empathy and emotion skills, it's totally possible. It's just up to our imagination to figure out how to do it in a way that's engaging. I think the engaging part's hard. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. You talked a little bit about it, like about measuring or assessing the emotions and doing it through behaviors. But in an online world, you cannot do that through the online behavior, right? Which is totally different than the real world behavior. So how do you assess? What are your thoughts on that? Like assessing the emotions?
Yeah. I mean, the example I gave is an online task. It's not a one-to-one proxy for how someone would respond into like an actual rejection, but online sort of prototypes or examples of emotional situations can get people to kind of think about how they would react in those situations. Better than surveys. So it's not perfect, but it's definitely better than how would you react in this random situation like a year ago. It's hard to answer. You have to run back and forth, huh?
Have you played with emotional preconditioning for these tasks? So putting somebody in the right using emotion to make it easier to learn a new task.
We haven't done that, but that's a great idea. I know that there is research that suggests that if you're already experiencing positive emotion, you can generate positive emotion more easily. I don't know, do you have any other thoughts or suggestions? Okay. Excellent. Awesome. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you have like kids that like working, like they're probably playing the games together, which can have like influence emotion kind of element inside of the game.
Like a social game, Zynga, but better.
Yeah.
I personally think figuring out how to do this in a social way where they're actually interacting with each other would be like the greatest thing ever. I can't think of a good way to do it, so if any of you guys have suggestions, that would be awesome. Because people keep saying, oh, like link it to Facebook somehow, but the young kids aren't on Facebook or probably shouldn't be interacting in that way through our game, so I don't quite know what to do.
Yeah, maybe you can have a new kind of like social for the kids.
You share with me your ideas. Thanks.
The graph you showed before with the improvement over time, where's the control on that?
We didn't have a good control group. Very important point. So a lot of times, active controls will show that same pattern. Just being involved in anything might improve depression by 8 points, and so that would be the next step. And we haven't tested the games at all, so we would need a control group to figure out the effect.
And how do you plan to get this in front of people that need it? I mean, it's going to be very difficult to. Are you approaching psychiatrists and psychologists? And
We're trying to get an NIH grant just to make sure the whole thing is valid and actually works. I'm being sort of raised through academia. It's very much like, let's make sure this works before we give it to anyone that could potentially be harmed by it. I'm in a psych department, so I'm sure I could reach therapists, but if you have other suggestions for how to, like the right audiences to target, I'm open to that.
Well, your website, you have a whole advisory board. It's
Yes.
as if you're a startup, but you're in academia. I mean, what's your financial model?
Our good question. We are a for-profit, science-based startup, sort of. So we're pursuing NIH funding kind of the same way academics would, but not through an academic structure. It's kind of rare.
But you provide consulting. Isn't that sort of a conflict?
And currently, yeah. I'm still a grad student, so this is my current job until I get funded.
Got it.
I'm supportive of all you.
Yeah, That was fantastic, and I wanted to thank you for presenting. We need to move on and have Jill come on, but can everyone give Tchiki a good round of applause?